from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. All eyes on Minnesota. A second U.S. citizen is killed over the weekend during ICE protests in Minneapolis. Escalating tensions already at a boiling point and sparking outrage in Washington. President Trump says he held a very good call, his words, with Governor Tim Walz. As the administration sends border czar Tom Homan to Minnesota, will he help de-escalate tensions on the ground? The mayor of St. Paul is standing by to respond. Plus, corporations urge de-escalation. More than 60 CEOs of Minnesota-based companies, including Target, 3M, and United Health, call for peace and cooperation between federal, state, and local governments in the wake of the weekend murder. And partial shutdown in sight. Senate Democrats warning now they will not support a funding bill without new limits on ICE operations following last weekend's shooting. Lawmakers have until midnight Friday to cut a deal or trigger a partial government shutdown. And that's where we begin, with the news gripping Washington and the nation after Border Patrol agents shot and killed a protester in Minneapolis on Saturday. A growing number of Republicans are now calling for a full investigation after this incident, the second killing of a protester by ICE officers in less than 3 weeks. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responding to the shooting incident and the backlash against the administration earlier today. Listen.
Nobody in the White House, including President Trump, wants to see people getting hurt or killed in America's streets. This includes Renee Good, Alex Preddy, the brave men and women of federal law enforcement, and the many Americans who have been victimized at the hands of illegal alien criminals.
Looming in the background of all of this, a new threat by Senate Democrats to force a partial government shutdown by the end of the week over DHS funding, as border czar Tom Homan heads for Minneapolis as the administration's main point of contact on the ground. Joining us now with the latest on all of this is Bloomberg Josh Wingrove reporting live from the White House. Josh, it's great to see you. I have to start with what appears to be an evolving tone from the administration. While the press secretary may have been blaming Democrats today, the president was talking about being essentially on the same wavelength, I think is the language he used, as Governor Walz. Which is it?
Yeah, it depends on who you ask and what time of day it is, Joe, really, because we started with what looked like as close as you ever get to a sort of retreat or partial retreat from the Trump administration, which, of course, rhetorically doesn't like doing that. But then they also sort of doubled down. You played that clip from Caroline Leavitt. It was not really clear from that entire briefing, who they really blamed for the death. They certainly did not raise question about the conduct of the officers, but they did allude to investigation. So I think this is shifting. And you talk about the shutdown. The big question now is, what will be enough for Democrats, right? I mean, if they put in Homan, which they have, it seems like Secretary Noem is being pulled back at the very least. Bavino looks like he won't be there going forward, at least according to a CNN report. Leavitt alluded to that as well. That is a change in approach from the feds. And so the question is, will that be enough for Democrats to sort of back down a little bit on their threat on the shutdown as well? But I think what is clear is the criticism that came after Preddy's death on Saturday was wider than we've seen with Renee Good and with others, including from sort of key conservative figures that the administration listens to, or at least, wants to keep on their side. So there is a reaction here, but they do seem like they're sort of going through it, in real time, trying to figure out where they're going to land on this. Trump does not want to admit, a failure of the administration or anything that could be reported as that, but clearly is also shifting tack at the same time.
Yeah. It's interesting, Josh, to your point, we heard from a number of Republicans yesterday, different than we did following the death of Renee Good. Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, James Comer got a lot of attention. Andrew Garbarino, who chairs Homeland Security, all calling for an investigation, testimony, hearings. Was it these members of Congress, or was it, in fact, the corporate executives, 60 of them from that state, who signed the letter distributed by the Chamber of Commerce, thinking of United Health, Target, and the rest, who actually got the president's attention?
I mean, Senator Paul, Senator Murkowski as well, the National Governors Association. I mean, the blowback to this was very widespread. So I suppose it can be all of it. And so where this goes from now, I think, remains unclear. And, we have other breaking news here, Joe, as you know, on Trump, on South Korea. So he and sort of pledging to raise the tariffs there. But I mentioned that just by way of saying he is sort of always trying to shift the agenda, shift the topic. And so, as we sit here in the, as you can tell, glamorous White House basement, we just don't know whether he'll be successful in that. And of course, what this looks like going forward in Minnesota, including questions about the investigation, right? The White House did dig in today saying that there are investigations ongoing, but of course, there've been complaints from the state that the federal government is not letting them investigate the shooting itself. And so there are a lot of questions concerning the death of Mr. Preddy, but specifically, but more widely, the operations there. And, this sort of step back from the federal government, we just don't know to what scale that is going to be. And I think, that'll become clear in the next couple of days.
You heard Josh mention it in the headline on the screen as well. The president on Truth Social, because of the Korean legislature not enacting our historic trade agreement, he just wrote, which is their prerogative, I am hereby increasing South Korean tariffs on autos, lumber, pharma, and all other reciprocal tariffs from 15% to 25%. Josh, we've got this matter. We've got a speech tomorrow in Des Moines. That is the next leg in the affordability tour that the president is trying to get a message across to voters here. To what extent will Minneapolis be a distraction, or is the whole point to keep moving from one headline to the next?
It's a great question. Let's take it bit by bit here. On the Korea thing, he's essentially ripping up, or at least for now, the deal and saying that's because the Koreans are slow walking it. I should note that there were a lot of question marks, including from what the American position was about this deal. We still, for instance, don't know what the shipbuilding cooperation will look like. And so this is another case for countries that are looking at this, including the EU and the UK that had their deals and that then saw the Greenland tariff threat come in. The Trump's deals aren't necessarily locked in. Certainly the Canadians and Mexicans with USMCA know that as well. So that, there's that. On the affordability piece, real big questions swirling about where the administration will come down on that. What, if anything, they will do on trying to use executive authority somehow on credit card rates, for instance. Trump has already poured cold water on the notion of using 401ks or allowing them to be used more widely for house down payments. That felt like a few days sort of round trip from them raising the idea to dousing the notion of it. And so, we'll see. And of course, Scott Besson said we could hear about the Fed as soon as this week, possibly. And so all these things are swirling right now. And, we'll see where it lands. But the Korean thing is a big one. I mean, we don't know yet whether this will actually materialize. He hasn't specified when that tariff hike will take effect. And I should note 3 times already this month, he's threatened tariffs that have not come into effect. Greenland, the Iran secondary tariffs, and of course, over the weekend, the 100% tariff on Canada. So it's possible, certainly possible, that this Korean tariff hike won't go into effect either.
Well, remarkable and breaking as we're speaking here. Josh, thank you so much. Live from the White House, Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove with the new salvo towards South Korea. We get back to news out of Minneapolis today, which is where, of course, we began. Earlier this afternoon, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, again holding forth in the briefing room, says it was Minnesota Democrats who were to blame for the escalating situation on the ground. Listen.
This tragedy occurred as a result of a deliberate and hostile resistance by Democrat leaders in Minnesota. For weeks, Governor Walz and the Mayor Jacob Frey and other elected Democrats were spreading lies about federal law enforcement officers who are risking their lives daily to remove the worst criminal illegal aliens from our streets.
Those comments came just before Leavitt outlined a potential plan to ease tensions in Minnesota following a phone call between President Trump and Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz. One that, in fact, President Trump said generated a good call, and he says they were on a similar wavelength. So joining us now with her reaction live from the ground in Minnesota is the mayor of St. Paul, Kaohly Her, who is herself under subpoena by the Department of Justice for potentially obstructing or impeding ICE operations. Madam Mayor, it's great to have you with us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. I wonder if you are taking heart in what the president describes as a good phone call, a very good phone call with Governor Walz. He said, we seem to be on a similar wavelength, or do you worry more about the rhetoric we heard from the press secretary today?
What I know about this president is that whatever needs to be said in order to make him feel like he's got to win here, right? I mean, I'm so disappointed when I hear the rhetoric that is still coming out of Washington, D.C., that they can stand here and say that it is local electeds here, it's Democrats here that have caused the heightened, tension within our city here. But when you have a federal government and its agents who are clearly telling people, recounting the incidents that they have caused on the ground, and it does not match the video evidence, I do not know how it is that they can turn around and blame that onto local electeds here, Democrats here, and especially the rhetoric comment when you group whole groups of people as murderers and rapists, when we know in Minnesota here that our immigrant and refugee communities have made our state stronger. This is a self-inflicted, self-created situation by the federal government. But you know what? Whatever it is that they need to say in order to give them the ability to leave our space here, I support it.
Do you take heart in the actions you saw today by the administration? It seems that Gregory Bovino is on his way home. Tom Homan is being dispatched to Minneapolis. Is that encouraging, or does that make you worry?
All I can do is have hope. And that is what we do here in Minnesota well, is that we are optimists in light of the challenges in front of us. All I can do is be hopeful, just like the rest of Minnesota, that this is a turning point for all of us here.
Let me ask you about some of the training that your office has been providing to protesters in your city, working with advocacy groups to teach constitutional observer courses, to train people on how to videotape law enforcement without interfering in ICE operations. I ask you about this, Mayor, because much of the rhetoric we've heard from the administration is these two people who were killed in the Twin Cities were interfering with federal ICE operations and therefore putting themselves in danger. What are you telling people to do?
We are telling people to not interfere into any of the federal agents' operations. In the Constitutional Observer training, we are very clear about what it means to be there and to document. And so I will say that I can't guarantee that everybody who shows up to an event is trained as a constitutional observer, but we know that we've trained thousands of people in order to be supportive and to be there to help document. And I want to just have one point of clarification that Alex was not at a protest. It was a morning in which he just happened to be in a space in which he saw activity and he wanted to go and document. I think that it is dangerous when we say that just because people are gathering or they exist is that they are protesting. They are not. They know that their neighbors have been taken off of the streets, that people are being ripped out of their homes forcibly, that people are having children and families ripped apart. And so when our neighbors see each other hurting and impacted, we show up. And showing up doesn't mean that we are protesting. It means we are there to document because we know that that legal documentation is the only thing that that family may have in legal proceedings to try to keep family members who are here legally here with their families.
One of the faces of this operation in your city is a friend's brother-in-law of yours, who now most people know as the man who was taken outside of his home wearing nothing but shorts, Crocs, and a blanket. Chong Lee Scott Tao, his photograph being taken out of his home in freezing temperatures after being arrested without a warrant. His ID apparently was not checked until he got back home. Homeland did bring him back home after he was pulled out of his house. They said they were looking for 2 sex offenders. The family says it was a case of mistaken identity. Mayor, has the federal government told you what that operation was all about?
So I don't have a direct connection with the federal government. They do not coordinate and they do not communicate with us proactively. What I can say, because this is an active investigation, is that identification was offered. And in the operations, that was not something that they considered or cared to take into consideration when they took Chong Lee out of his house. I think that not only was this an unfortunate incident, and I think it has been very gracious of the family to say it is a case of mistaken identity. It is the fact that he looks nothing like the people that they are looking for, and that to add insult to injury after the event. Instead of being truthful that they had the wrong person, they lied about it. They said that those individuals they were looking for lived in the home with this family, which they do not. And this family has been in the home for the last 2 years, and the individuals they were looking for one of them was already incarcerated. So in just basic public searches, they could have found that information. So I think that what is making the situation worse on the ground is that we cannot trust our federal government in being truthful about the work that they are doing and how they are executing on this work.
Well, I ask you about his case in particular because you were a Hmong refugee, and I know that you came to this country at age 3 as a Vietnam War era resettler. You were part of a resettlement program. And so individuals, I'm assuming, like Chong Lee, have played a long role in the diverse culture in your state, having fought side by side with Americans in the Vietnam War. To what extent have you seen authorities operating in communities of color versus European migrant communities in your city?
We have not seen one account of Europeans who, we know that there are Europeans who are here undocumented, and yet we have not heard of one account of them being profiled. What I will say just on your point about Chong Lee's family is that his mother, who just passed away a few weeks ago, I'm flying to California in a couple of weeks to attend his mother's funeral. His mother was one of the first Hmong nurses in Laos at the Samtong Hospital. She was a nurse with my mother-in-law, and they took care of wounded soldiers, American and Hmong soldiers who were fighting for democracy and fighting for America before they ever set foot in this country. And that is the family that this administration went after. A woman who raised her children to be law-abiding citizens, who fought and took care of soldiers and veterans, who came to this country and was a contributing member of society, and who has always been deeply committed to this country. That is the person that was ripped away. And in weeks of her death, that her family would be targeting this way is such a disgrace to the legacy of Hmong people and the fight that they had with the Americans and American soldiers.
Well, I appreciate you telling their story. Mayor Her, you've been in office, I believe, for 3 weeks, so this is your only reality as the mayor of St. Paul. Will anything short of ICE withdrawing from the city settle this standoff?
I think that ICE has to have a complete withdrawal from here. And to be honest, we have always worked with our federal agents on cases that do not violate our separation ordinance, that we have always been willing to get to work with them on detaining hardened criminals, people who have records who should not be here, and that we can continue to go back to working in a way that keeps our country safe because we know how to do that. Our law enforcement knows how to apprehend people and to keep our community safe, and that we would like to be able to go back to that environment in which we can do our jobs well.
Well, that's pretty important, Mayor, and I think it's worth underscoring that. You're pledging now before our listeners and viewers to work with federal authorities to arrest, detain, and prosecute those who are in this country illegally and have broken the law. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And we've always had that kind of relationship long before the Trump administration and previous presidential administrations. And so we continue to be committed to keeping law and order in our city.
Mayor, it's great to have you. St. Paul Mayor Kaohly Her, we thank you for being with us on a very busy day. Coming up, shares of health insurers plummeting after hours on a new report. We've got the details ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. Over the weekend, the heaviest winter storm in years dropped off almost a foot of snow on New York and many others across the country. New York City took the brunt. Bloomberg's Myles Miller filed this report from Central Park earlier this afternoon to break it down.
Nearly a foot of snow fell here in Central Park, 11.4 inches as of Monday morning. The economic toll is also mounting. We know that more than 3,000 flights were canceled Monday, following roughly 11,600 canceled on Sunday, the most since the COVID-19 pandemic. Natural gas futures surged above $6.30 per BTU, the highest since December 2022. Insurance claims average $15,400 normally around storms like this for water damage and freezing, with some exceeding $30,000. As it relates to transit, we know New Jersey Transit remains partially suspended with no timeline for full restoration, a critical artery to get people in and out of New York City and commuting to the financial center. Thousands of commuters couldn't reach work on Monday. That's lost productivity compounding through the week. And the cold isn't letting up. 12 degrees today, dropping to 5 by Thursday, and this stays locked in through February. Politically, this is the first major test for two brand new leaders. New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani and New Jersey Governor Mikey Sherrill, both less than a month into office, and so far they've avoided the mistakes that have ended or badly damaged the careers of their predecessors. Every street plowed, subways running, schools closed outright in parts of New York and New Jersey, and with the New Jersey transit suspensions meant to keep people safe. But the real test starts now. How do you manage weeks of cold and ice and making sure that this doesn't have an economic dent on cities and states? In Central Park, I'm Myles Miller, Bloomberg News.
Myles shivering for us in Central Park. We thank you, Myles. Breaking news this evening, shares of health insurers are falling in extended trades after the Wall Street Journal reported the Trump administration is proposing roughly flat rates for Medicare insurers next year. To break this down and all of today's market action, we turn to power moves now with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who's live at World Headquarters in New York. I guess traders didn't see this coming, Romaine.
Yeah, chill over these stocks right now. And we should point out Bloomberg has now confirmed that this is indeed the proposal. It would still have to go through the regulatory process. But effectively, what it would mean is that these health insurers would see an increase of 0.09% for the calendar year 2027. That compares to what they got this year for 2026. Of 5%. So effectively, the Trump administration is saying there'll be no material increase next year. And I want to put this into context as to why you're seeing the shares of these stocks fall so much. We're talking about more than 30 million Americans are a part of these plans. The U.S. government pays out to these companies, on average, almost $500 billion over the course of the year. The increase that they will get in 2027, $700 million with an M. You do some back of the envelope math, Joe, and you compare that to what they got in 2026, $39 billion. So imagine getting a $39 billion raise one year and then the government saying next year you're just going to get $700 million. That's why you're seeing the big drop in your shares. Humana, they have the most exposure to Medicare Advantage, about 70% of their business directly tied to that. Those shares down 14% in the after hours trade, Joe. And if that holds into tomorrow's cash session, that would be the worst one-day drop for that stock going back to at least 2022.
Harsh. We're going to be hearing from United Healthcare because it's the earnings parade here, right? We've got United Health, Boeing, UPS, GM. I haven't even touched the Mag 7. What's got your attention this week?
Well, now, there's certainly United Health. Obviously, they've had a lot of other issues, but this is something that, of course, is going to dominate that call tomorrow. But really, investors right now, Joe, are looking at two things right now. One is on the tech side, this big AI boom that, quite frankly, has been a big boon for the economy. It has driven a huge amount of the growth we've had here. Is that still intact? We're going to hear from Meta, Microsoft, just to name a few, as to whether they are going to continue this massive CapEx spending that has fueled the market and the economy. On the other side, watch those industrial stocks. You mentioned UPS and some of those names here, very much tied to the economy and, frankly, Joe, tied to a lot of the tariffs and other geopolitical issues going on out there. It's going to be less about the numbers they report and really about the commentary and whether they can give guidance to this market, Joe, that is actually going to satisfy them.
Why worried about any of this? Just buy gold, buy silver.
Hey, that's on fire, Joe. Gold at another record high, silver at a record high. Unfortunately, Joe, as you know, the reason why they continue to move is, well, a lot of investors, particularly those overseas, they've had it with America. They're dumping the dollar, they're dumping U.S. treasuries and moving into hard assets like gold, like silver, even non-precious metals like copper. I would keep an eye on that, Joe. We've talked a lot about that on the show today here, the idea of the debasement trade, whether it's back in full force or not. Pay attention. Stay tuned.
Fascinating, Romaine. Thank you so much. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick. He's dug out. Coming up, Democratic lawmakers are threatening a partial government shutdown this week. Yeah, here we go again. It's over DHS funding. We'll have details for you. It's all ahead on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington with breaking news on Minnesota and what appears to be an ongoing shift in messaging from the administration, at least in terms of President Trump, who posted on Truth Social just moments ago, quote, "I just had a very good telephone conversation with Mayor Jacob Frey of Minneapolis. Lots of progress is being made. Tom Homan," he writes, "will be meeting with him tomorrow in order to continue the discussion," unquote. That comes after a similar post earlier today touting a positive conversation with the governor, Tim Walz. Joining us now with the latest on all of this, Bloomberg's Erik Wasson with the echo chamber here in Washington. Erik, this has hit home on Capitol Hill. I know that senators are trying to get their way back into town after the snowstorm. The House is gone, and it is very likely the government, at least partially, will shut down at the end of the day on Friday. This, of course, has to do with funding for Homeland Security. And you can tell us how this is going to work, because it's not looking too good right now. Erik, what's next?
Well, certainly the calls between Trump and the Minnesota officials could ease some of the atmospheric tension and optics around this. But what Democrats are demanding are concrete changes to this package that the House pass. Could be warrant requirements, body camera mandates, other restraints on ICE. Some Democrats want to see a defunding of it, but I think the main strategy from Democratic leaders is to get some kind of restraints on the organizations of ICE and Border Patrol. But any changes would require the House to come back, and they really have only until Friday to come up with this. So Schumer right now is saying split 5 of this 6-part package apart. This would fund everything from the State Department, Treasury, Small Business Administration, and pass that, and then deal with DHS separately. But Republicans are resisting that, saying there's really no time and consent. You really need unanimous consent in the Senate to do any of this. And of course, the House would have to come back, and all Republicans would have to pass a rule with Republicans for these changes. So it's a really heavy lift. So we're predicting a likely government shutdown at this point. We're not seeing an off-ramp. And there's real consequences for businesses. The BLS unemployment report next week would likely not come out. Small business loans, Pentagon contracts all tied up. And the IRS is starting tax season now. So they could probably force people to review tax returns without pay. But that could also lead to delays as disgruntled workers slow down their efforts.
Well, it's interesting. We're talking about a collection of bills here, right? Just to be clear, Erik, DHS is one thing, but that's tied up with, I think, the point you're making, several other agencies. We've got DOD, Health and Human Services, Transportation and Labor. Would they all close in this world while the rest of the government stays open?
Well, non-essential workers would be furloughed. Essential workers would work without pay. But interestingly, ICE and Border Patrol got a big plus up in the Trump tax bill, $75 billion. Yeah. They would not only work, but they would likely work with pay. So it doesn't really stop. It would stop FEMA and TSA from being paid, however. So there was a deal on the table between Patty Murray, the Senate Democratic Appropriations leader, and a handful of other Democrats to really say, okay, we're going to go along with this. We'll just wait till we get back in power to really rein in ICE. But we got so many other wins here. The package overall reverses many of Trump's proposed cuts. $37 billion more for housing, $19 billion more for state and foreign aid. So it's just a lot of wins for Democrats, and they're going to see those sacrificed. So it was a hard call, but this new horrific shooting in Minnesota really galvanized the party to at least try to use this moment to get some reforms. We're hearing some noises from people like Susan Collins saying the reforms could be on the table, but the problem is just amending this would be very difficult, especially for the Republican House to come back, take up, and pass before the deadline.
With a very real look at what's happening, Erik Wasson, we thank you, Erik, for joining us as we add the perspective now of Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland, who serves on both the House Appropriations Committee and House Ethics Committee, so he knows a little bit about funding the government. Congressman, it's great to see you. Welcome back. I'd like to talk to you as a member of Congress, a Democratic member of Congress, but also as a lawman. And I'll remind our audience that you were not only professor of law at Harvard, but you were a state's attorney for Prince George's County, Maryland, and were assistant U.S. attorney for the federal district under Eric Holder. Let's start with the politics here. Democrats have made it pretty clear that they cannot stomach signing off on this DHS bill. Will we have a partial shutdown on Friday?
I mean, as you suggested, we are running out of time, but I don't think the asks that were made are over the top. For example, don't deport U.S. citizens, don't detain U.S. citizens. Those seems like things that we could, figure out a way to work out. ICE is doing that regularly, unfortunately, certainly detaining U.S. citizens. That should stop. Another one is where the body cameras. They've got the money to pay for them, put them on, because it's clear. We've seen this in law enforcement agencies across the country. It's helpful not only from an evidence standpoint when these cases go to trial, but it's also from a managerial standpoint. Helps them figure out who's doing a good job and who's not.
Interesting. So, of course, you've already had a chance to vote on these funding bills. The House is out. Now it's in the Senate's hands. Do you expect that when the House comes back next week, you'd be able to codify whatever changes are made, or could this be a weeks-long shutdown?
I think we'll have to see. But, the only bill that we splintered off was DHS, and all of them passed. So we've got all the appropriations bills over to the Senate. So the DHS holdup, Thune's trying not to splinter that off from the other ones for obvious reasons. But, I think if you can get all the other bills done, and they certainly could, as I said, the things we're talking about with respect to reforming DHS, we know that this would just be an intermediate step. I think it needs a complete overhaul at this point, at a minimum. But I think that's the kind of step we need to make. And I'm starting to hear Republican voices, like Tom Cole, for example, say, yeah, I've got some reservations about that shooting, but, we don't want to shut the government down. But I think there is a sentiment there that, you killed 2 civilians. Renee Good was unarmed. Mr. Preddy was disarmed and then shot, looks like in the back, and then 6 times after that. And had also been pepper sprayed before he was shot. It's a lot. And, I think even Republicans who don't necessarily want to get in the middle of all of this recognize that, from a legal perspective, this stuff's questionable and needs to be stopped en masse. But the individual cases should be reviewed and I think probably go to a grand jury.
Well, it's interesting, Congressman. I don't know if this is proven in the way you just described it, should take the fall for this, but there are impeachment articles that have been brought forth with Kristi Noem in mind, the Secretary of Homeland Security. We saw House Democrats introduce that legislation not that long ago, as a matter of fact, citing any number of issues here. About 120 Democrats have signed on to those articles, Congressman. Would you consider joining them?
Well, I think what they're going to do with those is they've got to update them because they don't have these 2 shootings and, what's taken place with respect to the last 3 weeks, as I recall, involved in the articles of impeachment. So I think they would need to be reviewed. But I think at this point, Noem needs to be removed. I don't know that Trump will do that, but she's clearly in over her head. The agency is, running amok. The chain of command is broken over there. And the statements she's made, especially after these really, horrific shootings, I think are clearly false and suggest that she didn't even look at the evidence before she made the statement. So they need somebody over there with some gravitas who has experience running on agencies like the ones in Homeland Security and can get the ship back, upright.
How do you read this move by the administration, and are you encouraged by this to have Greg Bovino leave the city and the state and have Tom Homan go in? He's meeting with the mayor tomorrow, as we just heard. Is this a sign of progress?
I don't know that it is. Some of the statements he's made have not been much better than the predecessor. But, at the end of the day, I think what it really comes down to is the mentality about, we're going to flood cities like Minneapolis with thousands of. There's 5 times more, ICE agents there than police officers right now, which makes absolutely no sense. And they're not trained to do these street types of enforcements. You can't do that on the fly. And it's a different type of training. Street policing is different than border patrol or, immigration patrol. And they're not recognizing that. But we're seeing it the hard way. And the decisions they're making on these shootings, I think, represent the fact that they haven't been trained how to handle these kinds of situations. So, I think getting them out of Minneapolis and like a clear change in what that strategy is, if you want to go after the worst and the worst, get the warrants to get the homicide, perpetrators and the rapists and the like. Everybody wants those guys off the street. But, these street patrols where they're just grabbing people, breaking out the windows, dragging them out of their cars or, shooting them in the street after they pepper spray them. Nobody wants that. Let's stop that.
Well, Congressman, I spoke earlier today with a constitutional attorney named Robert McWhirter. Here's what he said about these operations that you just described.
ICE agents are enforcing immigration law. For the majority, immigration law is a civil violation. You know what else is a civil violation? A traffic ticket. So now you have people in full military regalia enforcing civil violations. It's performative, it's a big show, and it's dangerous. And frankly, they're not even deporting as many people as the Biden administration and the Obama administration did.
When you put your former state's attorney hat on, Congressman, how do you react to that?
I think he's absolutely right. You know, it looks like what the Trump administration did was they made big promises about how many people they were going to deport. Then they realized that it's, you know, there's only so many murderers and rapists that are out there. And then they just started grabbing people to meet the numbers. And they've gone way over the top with respect to, you know, like Alligator Alcatraz and places like that. They're spending billions of dollars on enforcement efforts that really aren't making these communities safer. And you're having people who are, as we saw, getting detained in violation of their constitutional rights. People are dying in custody and people are being shot on the street. It's not working. It's not helping. Stop it. Let's just move on and get back to regular policing and law enforcement in these cities.
Well, it's good to have you join us, Congressman. Democrat Glenn Ivey of Maryland, we thank you for the insights, as always. Overseas now, where China's President Xi's move to probe his top general marks the most stunning development yet in the country's biggest military purge in roughly half a century. The corruption investigation against that general, who was once described as a sworn brother to Xi, leaves the highest decision-making body of the People Liberation Army decimated, with only one uniformed officer left to serve under Xi on the Central Military Commission. This announcement also has implications for Taiwan, succession, further turmoil in the Communist Party ranks. Joining us now with her insights into all of this, Bloomberg Economics chief geoeconomics analyst Jennifer Welch. Jenny, it's great to see you. A lot of people missed this story in the throes of the massive storm over the weekend, everything that took place in Minneapolis, everything that's happening in geopolitics. How significant is this, and do we believe what we're actually hearing reported from China in terms of the cause of this purge?
This is one of Xi's most significant purges, and that's quite a statement considering how many people he has purged over his tenure. But Zhang Youxia was not only a really powerful figure, as you mentioned, he was the highest ranking military officer on essentially China's Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Central Military Commission. The last surviving member after his former co-chair was purged last year. And he was also a close friend of Xi, who has ties to him dating back to the relationship between their fathers, who were close friends, fought together in China's civil war. In terms of the rumors that this was for the result of Zhang potentially leaking secrets to the United States or engaging in some sort of coup plotting against Xi Jinping, I tend to put a hefty grain of salt to those rumors. I think the more likely cause is the simpler cause, which is that Xi has taken an adamant stance against corruption in the PLA, which remains pretty endemic, and including under Zhang's leadership. And so this was in some ways a response to that, potentially also a response to the idea that Zhang, having been in this really powerful position for so long, has potentially become a threat in Xi's mind, you know, developing an alternative power center, even if that just grew organically and not through any intentional effort to challenge Xi.
So what does this mean for China's military in the near term, and how should Taiwan be viewing this, Jenny?
I think in the near term, it means a couple of things. First, additional purges are likely to come, including of officers who are seen as close to Zhang, as well as another major general who was purged at the same time, and the generals who were purged last year. So we're likely to see continued waves. All of that means more of a shakeup of the PLA that, for example, it's going to be paralyzing the system. People are going to be nervous about their jobs. They're going to be concerned about taking any risks or stepping out of line. The people who were pushing decisions and reforms and guiding major decisions aren't going to be there anymore, and it's going to take time to rebuild. The immediate impact suggests, therefore, that if I was Xi Jinping, I'd probably be thinking twice about using the military if I felt I had the choice to make a decision on that. But we shouldn't discount the PLA. It is still a very powerful and effective force. There are still plenty of soldiers and commanders who will continue to lead it and who will act if ordered to by Beijing.
Jenny, it's great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Jennifer Welch from Bloomberg Economics with us live on Balance of Power. Coming up, more on the breaking news of President Trump touting what he calls a very good conversation now with the mayor of Minneapolis as he pulls Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino out of the state. Our political panel weighs in next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us as we bring you breaking news and a notable shift, even since we've taken air less than an hour ago, involving President Trump's posture when it comes to Minnesota. The president touting positive conversations today with the state's governor earlier and now the mayor of Minneapolis. Writing on Truth Social, I just had a very good telephone conversation with Mayor Jacob Frey. Lots of progress is being made, exclamation point. Tom Homan will be meeting with him tomorrow in order to continue the discussion. Indeed, Tom Homan is being dispatched to Minneapolis as the president yanks his controversial Border Patrol commander, Greg Bovino, from the state. Joining us now with their reaction to everything that is unfolding before our eyes. This evening's political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, Republican strategist, a partner at Stone Court Capital, and Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Jeannie, how are you reading these developments, and are you encouraged?
Mildly encouraged. I mean, this is the minimal that the White House needs to do, but haven't talked to anybody who thinks that this is enough. Let's not forget, while Tom Homan has been at this a lot longer than either Kristi, Noem, or even Bovino, he is also the border czar. He is the face of Donald Trump's immigration policy. He is the one responsible for those deportations to CCOT. So, we have to, I think, just wait and see if this is a first step in a revamp of ICE that includes training, mandatory body cams, and the rest, or if this is just a way to sort of assuage people that things are going to get better and sort of try to move beyond this. So I think a wait and see attitude.
We're getting some mixed messaging from the administration, aren't we, Rick? The press secretary spent a lot of time at the podium in the briefing room today blaming Democrats for the violence that's unfolded in Minneapolis, even as the president talked about being on a similar wavelength. Those are the words he used with Governor Walz, who he's been criticizing day after day. Who is delivering the official line of the administration?
Well, ultimately, it's always Donald Trump. And as we know, he delivers a lot of lines in the course of a day. And it's not unusual for him to completely flip-flop on a stated position. So he's been attacking the governor and the mayor pretty vociferously over the course of the last few months in a lead up to the kind of episodes we've seen, giving a lot of aid and comfort to the ICE officers who were really going after the community there. And then today, you would have thought it was a completely different state, completely different governor, completely different president. Yeah. So, look, I mean, there's a lot at stake for this administration. They're trying to get a budget through Congress. Their polling data is plummeting on the public support for these immigration raids. And there's no question that the administration, through their various cabinet officers and officers on the ground, have overplayed their hand significantly, killing any chance they have in Minnesota of contesting a governor's race. I mean, let's just keep piling up the carnage of public policy and personal failures on this one state, one policy. So, yes, I think Donald Trump's trying to reverse course as quick as he can. And as Jeannie says, we'll see how far they go to try and make it right.
Well, if there is a real reversal here, Jeannie, does this do anything to potentially avoid a government shutdown, or that's as good as done?
I think it is getting very difficult just from the perspective of the calendar to see how we avoid a partial or full shutdown. Is it possible? Sure, anything's possible, but the calendar is working against it. We've got a House that's out. We've got a Senate that's struggling to get back. Many people coming from areas with bad weather. You guys have had bad weather in D.C. And of course, that's just the start of it. They've also got to figure out how they're going to address what is a Democratic juggernaut now in the Senate of people, including the two independents who caucus with Democrats, who are saying we will not fund a DHS if it remains like this. So I think we're looking more at a shutdown. And of course, I think we all have to take a step back and say, would any of this be happening today in the last few minutes, this breaking news about the president talking to Frey, talking to the Minnesota governor, going on Truth Social, if it hadn't been for those video cameras, and now we understand police body cameras that show us what is going on out there, because everything the administration said after the incident was diametrically opposed to what we saw with our own eyes on those cameras. And that's what's really changed things here.
Yeah, multiple angles reportedly from different body cameras are being reviewed right now as the federal government investigates this. Rick Davis, what do you make of the conversation on Capitol Hill? The House is gone right now. They couldn't get back to pass a bill unless called, and then following this storm would be a lot more difficult said than done. So it looks like we're going to get a short-term partial shutdown of at least some duration. What does John Thune do, knowing the House already got its work done, and Chuck Schumer wants him to break up and rewrite these bills?
Yeah, it's not totally clear how far Chuck Schumer wants to go. And as you point out, the process of getting a bill passed now, if any amendments are made in the Senate, is what would cause the shutdown. The Capitol Hill sage, Erik Wasson, had a conversation with you just a little while ago. Democrats are conflicted. Part of the problem is that they got a lot in these bills that they've fought hard to win, which is why you saw a bipartisan overwhelming bipartisan vote in the House, which we have not seen much of this year. And so this thing was on a clear trajectory to get done in the Senate, all 6 appropriations bills as they're supposed to be done. And then this incident in Minneapolis really set off a lot of concerns that Democrats had and some Republicans all along. So if they can find accommodation in language or in building confidence by the administration's actions to get this back on track, shouldn't be much of a lift. There is a lot of favorable motion toward getting these deals done, and I have no doubt that Thune is going to work overtime to make sure Democrats get what they want to be able to sign on.
Only got about 30 seconds, Jeannie. You know what we haven't been talking about? Affordability. And the president's headed for Des Moines tomorrow to deliver another speech on that issue. Will it get any attention?
It absolutely will, I believe, because it's on top of mind. You know, just the cold alone, Joe, we have seen people terribly concerned about energy prices, not to mention groceries and the rest. So the president should be talking about affordability, but of course, he's got a lot else on his plate. And the media is really focused right now on what's going on in Minneapolis. So, but if anybody can break through, Joe Matthew, it is Donald Trump. So we'll see what he has to say tomorrow.
And we'll be listening tomorrow with the help of Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis. Great to have you both here, and I'm glad you made it through the snowstorm. Others are still trying. A live shot outside the Bloomberg Bureau in D.C. That minivan, those tires are spinning. Tim, let's get some sand. We'll meet you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.